Okay. All right. So I am Terry Camersell, and I'm here on behalf of Creation Fellowship Santee. We're a group of friends who love to study God's Word and believe that the Bible, when read properly, disproves Darwinian evolution. We've been meeting on this online platform since May of 2020. And since meeting online, we've been blessed with almost 90 individual speakers covering creation science, other theology topics, and even current events. Our goal is to equip believers to be ready to share their faith. You can find most of our past presentations by visiting tinyurl.com CFS archives. That's C like creation, F like fellowship, S like Santee, and the word archives. While you're there, you'll be able to find 3 different times that our speaker for tonight has spoken for us in the past. Tonight, we're blessed to have back John Harris. He has been the director of Living Waters Europe since 2013, training a large team of believers to go out and share the gospel with the people of Europe. He is also the founder and CEO of Creation Science UK. And that is correct. He is here tonight from across the pond. Sacrificing his middle of the night great sleep so that he can speak with us. He also leads his own monthly apologetic study on Zoom with international attendees. And tonight we're excited to have him come for the first of a 2-part special debut of his lesson he's been researching about Haldane's dilemma. This week is part 1, but be sure to stay or to come back next week for part 2. With that, John, I'm ready to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for inviting me. Again, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping you see a guy on the top left corner and the words Haldane's dilemma in the middle. So if that's the case, then I'm going to go ahead. So hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Today, I'll be talking about Haldane's dilemma. So Haldane's dilemma is something we don't hear a lot about these days, but it's fantastically simple to understand, and it can dismantle evolution within 5 minutes. I am not exaggerating. I've used this during open air. I've used it in universities. I've used it when talking to people who insist that evolution is true. I've used it everywhere, especially with Christians who believe that God used evolution somehow to bring about life. So, what is Haldane's dilemma? Before I start, let me be clear about what I mean when I say evolution. When I'm talking about evolution, I'm not referring to adaptation or natural selection. Natural selection happens all the time. We know this. If you have an animal that's not suitable for a certain environment, then guess what? It dies out. It gets selected out. If you have a variety of dogs where some have long hair and some have shorter hair, well, the ones with short hair will probably not going to survive if they are living in a very cold environment. And the ones with long hair will probably not survive if they live in a hot environment, like the equator. So we see adaptation and natural selection happening all the time, but natural selection only selects from the variety that already exists. It does not create anything new. But evolutionists want us to believe that natural selection through mutation creates new kinds of animals. Well, Haldane has proven this to be wrong many years ago. He says it's impossible for this to happen. And this is what we're going to look at today. What is this dilemma all about? How does it work? How can we use it? And what are the objections evolutionists give to try to dismiss this dilemma? But since I have a lot to say, I won't have time to cover everything within one session. So my second part for next week will answer all these questions. I'll be looking at all the objections evolutionists bring, and I'll show you how to refute them. They're just simply wrong. All right, so here is a quick introduction. This dilemma was brought up by a very famous British scientist. His name was John Burdon Sanderson Haldane, but he was nicknamed Jack or JBS for whatever reason. This guy was an evolutionist himself, and as far as I know, he lived believing evolution is true, and he died believing it to be true, but he couldn't reconcile it. This is what happened. After they discovered that the DNA molecule exists in the form of a 3-dimensional double helix in 1953, Haldane did some simple calculations a few years later and found that humans couldn't have possibly evolved from ape-like creatures. There just wasn't enough time. So how did he do it? Well, he took everything into account, which we'll talk about in a minute, and found out that his calculations directly conflicted with the theory of evolution. This became known as Haldane's dilemma, and this dilemma was never, ever resolved, and it's been going on since 1957, and we missed out on using this for all this time. I'm pretty convinced that evolutionists who think this dilemma is resolved, even though it isn't, don't really understand what it's all about. The few who read Wikipedia and repeat what it says shows that they don't understand the problem at all. In fact, if Wikipedia is right about the solution that it claims, then they have a whole new problem that's even worse than the dilemma itself. I'll be talking about all this in part 2 of my talk, which will reveal a lot more interesting information. But first, to appreciate the seriousness of this dilemma, we'll have to go a little back to the time of Darwin. In Darwin's days, when he wrote about the origin of species, he didn't know the complexity of a cell, as we know. He thought the cell is made of a microscopic lump of jelly-like substance, entirely destitute of texture, destitute of organs, formless lump of albuminous matter, and with no trace of organization. Basically, he thought the cell is a textureless, organless, formless, jelly-like material that has no organization. Now, fast forward 150 years, and this is what we discover. Here is a simple diagram of a cell. It turns out this is what this formless, textureless lump of jelly-like substance really looks like. I've got this whole diagram actually printed on a whole large piece of paper. When I'm doing those talks in person, I normally bring them out and show them to you. They're absolutely huge. You can zoom in and look at it and you'll be fascinated. It's a mind-blowing map. It's more complicated than a television circuit diagram. I don't know if you've ever seen one. We don't even know everything about the cell yet. So much for Darwin's jelly-like substance with no trace of organization. I think it's clear we should not be getting our science lessons from Charles Darwin. It turns out a cell is more complicated than a fully functioning city with its normal power supply, transport, traffic control, business transactions. In fact, a single-celled organism is more complicated than a space shuttle with its built-in computer software and its self-correcting control systems. It is just simply mind-boggling. They didn't really know how complicated the cell was until 1953, when they discovered the double helix structure of DNA. On this day, in 1953, Cambridge University scientists James D. Watson and Francis H.C. Crick announced that they have determined the double helix structure of DNA, the molecule containing human genes. It turns out in the nucleus of a cell, there is this most fascinating database system that we have ever seen, we call DNA. DNA is organized into long structured structures called chromosomes. Humans have 46 of them. That's 23 pairs, one for each from each parent in each cell. Here you see it under a light microscope. This is under an electron microscope. Here is one zoomed in. Are you impressed yet? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Let me show you how it works. This is very significant for what I'm explaining. This is what a double helix stranded DNA that's twisted looks like. That's why we call it a double helix. If you untwist it, it looks like a ladder. The rungs of this ladder are called base pairs. So this is a quick DNA lesson. We call it base pairs because there are two of them. One on each side of the strand. These base pairs on each side are holding the sides of the ladder, and the base pairs are the bits that hold the information about everything. It's the actual database in the DNA. This is why we have 10 fingers or 8 fingers and 2 thumbs, because the DNA says so. We have 2 arms, 2 legs, because the DNA says so. Every detailed structure of your eyes, ears, heart, digestive system, skeletal system, nervous system, cardiovascular system, muscular system, kidney, liver, everything is programmed in your DNA. It's one massive database of information. Every living thing is more or less made of the same cells and DNA, but the instructions in the DNA are all that's needed to become something different. In other words, it's the code or the instructions in the DNA that makes everything become a tree, a plant, insects, fruit, flowers, humans, and animals. So depending on what the DNA or chromosomes are programmed to do, you will get something totally different. It's the same hardware, if you're thinking of computers, but with different software. It's just amazing. Bill Gates said in his book, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. It's even more fascinating than that. If each one of these DNA strands inside each one of our cells were to be unwound, it would be about 5 or 6 feet long. We have about 50 to 75 trillion of these cells in our bodies. Some have more than others. I'm trying to lose some of mine. If the DNA from each cell were placed end to end, the chain would be from 90 to 135 trillion meters long. Do you know how long that is? Well, if all the DNA in one person's body were placed end to end, it would extend to the moon. Not just halfway there, but all the way there. Not just once, but 552,000 times. Now, that's a lot of information. Now, let me put it in another way. If every cell in one person's body were typed out into books, they would fill the Grand Canyon. Not once, not twice, but 98 times. Some say 78 times, but you get the point. Do you know how big that is? I felt that it probably deserves an explanation. Here are the measurements. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, 18 miles wide, and over a mile deep. This is a giant hole, nearly half the length of Great Britain. I know Great Britain is not that huge, but this is where I live, and it's nearly halfway there, the whole height of it. That's up to 18 miles wide. Remember that? That's about to scale on the screen. I've tried to make it as close to the scale as possible, and over a mile deep. So it's a big fat hole that's a mile deep. Can you even imagine this giant hole if this really existed in Great Britain? Now, these books will fill this giant hole not once, but 98 times. This is what 98 times bigger looks like. Now, that's massive. That's about twice as big as my screen can show you. Certainly bigger than England. If I actually reduce this down to scale, well, compare that to the size of the UK now. This giant hole is many times bigger than all of the United Kingdom. That's England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and plus some of the other European countries added. Now, this is absolutely crazy. If you didn't think that's impressive, check this one. If one set of DNA, that's one cell's worth from every person who ever lived, estimated to be almost 50 billion, were placed in a pile, so that's everybody ever who exist and have existed, put together, their DNA, well, it would weigh less than an aspirin. And now remember, it's basically the full physical feature or features of a person in microscopic detail. Wow. So if this entire database information of every human being who ever lived is stored away, it would fit in a container that weighs about 320 milligrams. It's just laughable. That means you can store and rebuild all of humanity from this small little container. Now, there are a lot of similarities between a computer and the structure of DNA. I'm going to help you see that. If we split the DNA halfway down this ladder where the information is stored, you'll see clearly how the data is stored. Usually this is done by a machine called RNA polymerase. It unwinds the section it needs and makes a copy of it. So clever. Now, this exposes all the base pair it needs. When it does that, this strip is called messenger RNA. After a bit of clever editing, the strip of data is ready for the cell to use in a very special way. They tell us that humans have 3.2 billion base pairs, but it's actually more, so I'm going to show you that in a minute. So far, so good. Here's how the information is broken down in the DNA. Each base pair could be one of 4 possible values. We call them A, C, G, and T. Basically, it can be 4 different values. The base pairs are grouped in 3s like this. We call those codons. These are what they call protein coding DNA. That means each set of 3 can be up to 64 different possible combinations because each base pair could have 4 values. But it doesn't need all of that anyway. Each codon is like a key that fits perfectly for one specific amino acid. This amino acid is literally the smallest building block for building proteins in a cell. It's what everything in the cell is made of. These codons are like a key that unlocks the correct amino acid and puts them into a chain. It builds them into an amino acid chain to make a specific protein. That's how information is stored in the DNA. Here's a quick example of the information it can hold. Imagine this sentence: John is amazing. Now, that's obviously a very true statement. I humbly say that myself. If this sentence represents one protein, then each letter of each word in this sentence would be coded by one amino acid. If you change one amino acid, the letter changes, right? That means the sentence changes and you get gibberish. The sentence won't make sense anymore. If this happens, the protein will be considered defective or broken, and the outcome will be absolutely detrimental or deadly to the cell. Okay, so I hope that made sense so far. Anyway, a set of codons are called gene, and a set of genes are called genome. And along with other base pairs, this is the complete set of DNA. This is absolutely ingenious. And I'm only sticking with the basics here. The actual cell is far more fascinating and complicated than that. In fact, today, we know that these genetic codes are coded in 4 dimensions within the DNA, all right? Not single dimension, a 4-dimension. That means it changes with time. Just when you think you know everything, it gets even more amazing. But we don't have time to talk about this for now. Here's an amazing version of everything I explained. It's a secular video that says it all. I don't know how you can be an atheist after watching this, I'll be honest with you. Now, after this, I'm going to explain to you why I said all this. So please pay attention. Enjoy this video. It's only a couple of minutes long.
Here is a cell, the basic unit of all living tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genome. In humans, the genome is split between 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome contains a long strand of DNA, tightly packaged around proteins called histones. Within the DNA are sections called genes. These genes contain the instructions for making proteins. When a gene is switched on, an enzyme called RNA polymerase attaches to the start of the gene. It moves along the DNA, making a strand of messenger RNA out of free bases in the nucleus. The DNA code determines the order in which the free bases are added to the messenger RNA. This process is called transcription. Before the messenger RNA can be used as a template for the production of proteins, it needs to be processed. This involves removing and adding sections of RNA. The messenger RNA then moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Protein factories in the cytoplasm, called ribosomes, bind to the messenger RNA. The ribosome reads the code in the messenger RNA to produce a chain made up of amino acids. There are 20 different types of amino acid. Transfer RNA molecules carry the amino acids to the ribosome. The messenger RNA is read 3 bases at a time. As each triplet is read, a transfer RNA delivers the corresponding amino acid. This is added to a growing chain of amino acids. Once the last amino acid has been added, the chain folds into a complex 3D shape to form the protein.
Wow. This is just crazy. This is just mind-boggling. The amino acids are actually 2-dimensional structures, and when they get folded together, they become 3 dimensions. I mean, this is just plain crazy stuff. But why am I telling you all this? Well, because it's ridiculously close to how computers work. I like doing this because I'm a software developer by profession in about half a dozen computer languages, including low-level machine code language, and the similarities are just uncanny. For example, computer memory, we call RAM, is usually stored as bits of code. Each bit of memory can be a 0 or 1, giving us 2 possible values for each bit. Now compare that to the DNA base pair, where each base pair can be A, C, G, or T, giving us 4 possible values. In computers, every 8 bits is conventionally known as a byte, giving us 256 possible combinations. The DNA equivalent is 3 base pairs, and it's called codon, which gives us 64 possible combinations, which is far more than we need. In computers, 2 bytes is conventionally known as a word, but it depends on the computer architecture. In DNA, many codons is called a gene. And finally, all the bits and bytes together are known as RAM, but in the DNA, all the base pairs are known as DNA. Now, can you see? It's exactly the same structure. It's just unbelievable. It's as if an intelligent mind designed the DNA. And they want to convince our children that all this is by accident. Now, when it comes to computers, they're happy to admit that it took many geniuses over multiple generations, investing millions of hours, spending millions of pounds, to come up with a fantastically fine-tuned architecture we call computers, which can only just mimic what human intelligence can naturally do with the brain. But when it comes to DNA, well, we tell our kids it took no intelligence, no planning, no designer, just pure dumb random chance processes. I don't know why we waste our time training our engineers and spend loads of money to design anything. All we have to do is just hang around for a few million years, and hey, presto, you can pick up the latest 16-core Intel processor, I don't know, with the latest state-of-the-art MSI GeForce RTX 3080 Ti graphics card from your back garden. It's just pure insanity. It really is. No wonder Bill Gates, who knows 1 or 2 things about computers, said DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. The truth is, the code in the chromosome is more complex and holds more information than all the computer programs ever written by man combined. Anyway, when we discovered the DNA and how it works, evolutionists came along and started saying that mutations in the DNA are the driving force behind evolution. So, what are mutations? This is very relevant for today's Haldane's dilemma. Mutations are basically corruptions in the base pair sequence. Let me show you. It could be caused by adding 1 or more base pairs to the DNA molecule. That's usually a bad thing because it's causing what they call a frame shift. It's shifting the 3 base pairs halfway in the middle of the codon. So everything is offset by one base pair, and all the words change. The whole sentence changes. It literally changes the entire protein to become something completely different. This is absolutely a disaster. This is not like shifting a sentence by just 1 complete letter, keeping the rest of the sentence intact. No, this is changing every single letter in that sentence. The whole sentence is changed. Another mutation is when you remove a base pair. We call those deletions. That's also usually bad because it's causing a frame shift again in the base pair, but it's the other way around. This is also changing every letter in a sentence. Again, this is not like shifting a sentence by 1 letter. This is changing every single letter in that sentence. Depending on what you change, this could also be deadly for the organism, needless to say. Or it could happen when there is a change to the base pair itself. We call this substitution, which is probably the most common mutation we get. Although it does cause damage, it's the one that causes the lesser produces the lesser consequence. Here's another one. We could consider a bad mutation. A whole set of genes, a whole set of instructions can break off and attach themselves somewhere else, even to another chromosome altogether. It just jumps and goes somewhere else. We call these translocation, or they attach backwards, back to themselves, but backwards. They're called inversions. Or they duplicate themselves and add themselves somewhere else. Most of these are considered bad mutations or even deadly. But some of these mutations can be neutral. because they don't change anything. That's why we call them neutral. The other mutations, like the insertions, the deletions, the translocations, the inversions, and the duplications, are not so neutral. I think that's pretty clear. Now, this is important. That'll be clearer later. Anyway, basically, a mutation is anything that's gone wrong with the DNA. This could happen because of an error when it's copying the DNA or the RNA, or when the cell is duplicating itself. The mutations could also happen because of the environment, like you get exposed to harmful rays, like X-ray or something else. Even though these mutations are usually very bad or harmful, evolutionists think when these errors create something new or something good for survival, then these new mutations are called beneficial mutations. So if it does something good, then it's beneficial. And this is where neutral selection comes in. If the mutation is harmful, then, this is where natural selection comes in. So if the mutation is harmful, then natural selection gets rid of them. If the mutation is beneficial, then natural selection keeps them. That means they are fixed in the population. When they are fixed, that means that's called fixation. All right. Anyway, evolutionists believe that beneficial mutations drive forward evolution. That's because every time there is a mutation that brings about something good, natural selection selects it. That's why people who believe in this process are called selectionists. And that's where we get survival of the fittest from. All right. Now, let's be clear. We all believe in natural selection. That's one of the ways we get variety, variations within a created kind around the world, like we said earlier. But the difference is that evolutionists are claiming that you can make a new kind of creature using natural selection. And that we don't believe. Let's get something clear. Apart from the fact that the beneficial mutations are very rare, but when they do happen, it comes at a cost. So there is no such thing as a beneficial mutation without fitness cost. In other words, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So what does that mean? It means you don't usually get a beneficial mutation that brings about a new or a good trait without usually trading off with another trait or paying the cost of another trait. Here's an example of a beneficial mutation. This stops malaria, which is deadly, but it comes at a cost. What is the cost? It comes at the cost of causing sickle cell disease, which may not kill you, but it's very harmful. So you gained something, but you lost something else. That's the fitness cost. So you don't usually get a beneficial mutation without fitness costs. But believe it or not, we're going to ignore all that. To be extra kind, we're going to assume that every beneficial mutation comes without any fitness cost. You can't get fairer than that. This is me trying to help the evolutionist to help them out so that it doesn't look like we're being unfair. So this is where Haldane's dilemma comes in. So who is Haldane? Haldane was a very famous scientist. He was a British-born Indian scientist known for his work in the study of physiology, genetics, evolutionary biology, and in mathematics, where he made innovation contributions to the fields of statistics and biostatistics. He was basically a clever man, certainly cleverer than me. I'm happy to admit that. And even though he was the one who discovered this dilemma, which basically dismantles evolution, he was not a creationist. As far as I know, he died as an evolutionist. In fact, he was a socialist, Marxist, atheist, and a humanist. You don't get much more opposite than that to Christianity. He was so clever, other evolutionists said that he was perhaps the most brilliant science popularizer of his generation. Some even said he's the cleverest man I've ever knew. So Haldane must have been pretty smart. According to Theodosius Dobzhansky, who was very well known himself as a Ukrainian-American geneticist and evolutionary biologist, he said Haldane was always recognized as a singular case. Singular means exceptionally good. He was great. And Michael J.D. White, who was a zoologist and cytologist, which is not the same as Scientologist. Cytology is the branch of biology, said about Haldane that he was the most erudite biologist. Erudite means someone with just fantastic knowledge. The most erudite biologist of his generation and perhaps of this century. All right, so I think we're getting the point here. Haldane was clever, and evolutionists around the world should really pay attention to what this guy's got to say. And believe it or not, they did. So what is this dilemma that he discovered? Well, to make this easy for me, I'm going to read a snippet from the book, The Biotic Message. This is a very, very good book, which I'd recommend if you want to get into this even deeper. This explains it really well, and I'll graphically explain it all to you afterwards. So if you don't get it, don't worry. I'm going to just explain it. First, I'm going to read stuff, then I'm going to explain it, and then we're going to show it the graphical in a fashion to help you out. So in 1950s, the evolutionary geneticist J.B.S. Haldane calculated the maximum rate of the genetic change due to differential survival. He reluctantly concluded there is a serious problem here, now known as Haldane's dilemma. His calculations show that many species of higher vertebrate could not plausibly evolve in the available time. Evolution requires the substitution of old prevalent traits with new rare traits. There are limits to the rate these substitutions can occur, limits that depend primarily on the reproduction capacity of the species. Haldane's dilemma examines these limits. So what happened? Well, Haldane understood how mutations work in DNA. He understood there were limits. So seeing he studied population genetics, he was trying to calculate these limits. Why did he do that? Because he wanted to see how many generations it would take to evolve a human being. As a geneticist, he took everything into account to work out the cost of evolution. What you're seeing on the screen comes directly from his specific paper. He took everything into account: the cost of continuity, the cost of mutation, the cost of segregation, the cost of random loss, the cost of substitution. He took into account everything. Although he didn't name them exactly like this, he did address them all. He was very thorough. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, now, wait a minute, John, what is this cost of evolution all about? What does cost of evolution even mean? All right, I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. I'm going to compare it to having children. This is probably going to be the easiest way to explain it. If you're a parent and listening to this, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You love your children, but boy, do they come at a cost. The cost of feeding them, the cost of clothing them, the cost of driving them around everywhere, the sleepless nights, the complaining. I remember going to my dad shortly after having 3 kids and asking him, why didn't you tell me that it's so hard to have kids? There's so much work. I haven't slept for the past 6 years. You know what he said? He told me in Arabic. He said, John, I'm not crazy if I told you wouldn't have had any children. And you know what? He's right. It did make sense. So I make sure I took a leaf out of his own book and followed his example with my own children. I have to tell you, though, when my kids were young, I was convinced their ancestors were ape-like creatures, right? My oldest daughter had to go to gymnastics weekly to stop her climbing up walls like a monkey. My oldest son never stopped talking. I don't know where he got that from. My youngest son was like a ninja chameleon. He would blend in with the background so much, we often lost him, didn't know where he was. He was the perfect candidate for the movie Home Alone. We could have easily left him at home by accident. We'll be in the car driving, and then suddenly everybody shouts, David! And then he's in the car, but we haven't noticed him because he's so quiet. Well, evolutionist comes at a cost too. I'm going to give you a quick summary before I move on. I'll paraphrase each one of them, try to keep it as simple as possible. I'm doing this in case an evolutionist is watching this video later so they know I did my homework, all right? This is for the benefit of the evolutionist and also for you guys. The cost of continuity. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means how many children you need to have to keep the population going. The cost of mutation. What does that mean? Well, how many children you need to have to make up for bad mutations in the population. The cost of segregation. Well, how many children you need to have to keep the different varieties in your population. The cost of random loss. Well, how many children you need to have to make up for the deaths that happen through natural causes in the population. What about the cost of substitution? Well, that's how many children you need to have to keep the favorable traits in the population. So he added all these together and worked out what we call the cost of evolution. Like I said, he was clever. I wish other evolutionists would do their homework just like this guy did. Here is what it looks like in his paper. A piece of cake, right? This is one of many formulas. Anyway, if you like examples, here is one from this book, the same book. And by the way, this is, again, a real good book to get into. There are several chapters dedicated to the population genetics and Haldane's dilemma in this book. So it's really very informative. Now, imagine a breeding population of 100,000 individuals. Imagine 99,998 have the old trait O, and 2, a male and a female, have the new trait N. Imagine trait N, that stands for new, has just arisen from O, the old, by beneficial mutation. The evolutionary goal is to substitute trait N for trait O in the population. To accomplish this goal, differential survival must eliminate the 99,998 type O individuals and all their heirs. So basically, if you have a mutation in the population, and it happens to be a good one, then the couple who had the good mutation must outlive all the other people in that population. So far, so good. So how is that going to happen? Well, this can be accomplished in a single generation if there is perfect selection. That is, if the survival values of O and N are 0 and 1 respectively. Yet there is an enormous cost involved. For every surviving type N individual, there are 49,999 individuals, type O, that must perish without heirs. That means they must go without having children. The population size must be regenerated from the 2 survivors. Everything starts from scratch with a new survivor. It's kind of like in Noah and his family. They were the only survivors, and the whole population had to be repopulated from them. If after all that you don't get it, don't worry. I'm going to explain all this in a much simpler way in just a minute. But basically, whenever there is a new beneficial trait, the individuals or the couple with this new beneficial trait must survive over all the others. This is where it gets interesting, so please pay close attention. It goes on to say, let us assume evolution can happen like this continuously, generation after generation for millions of years. Take a species like man with a nominal 20 years generation time, extrapolate backwards from this known species to a time 10 million years ago. This is 3 times earlier than this said occurrence of the 4-foot-high Australopithecine Lucy. So he's saying, let's pretend a human generation is just 20 years and evolution happened over 10 million years ago, which, by the way, is 3 times older than Lucy, who is supposedly one of our early human ancestors. So the author of this book, which is called Walter James Mine, it's being very nice of him to make these assumptions. He's making assumptions because he's helping the evolutionists by these assumptions. He's giving the evolutionists more time to work with to help them out. And that's what we do everywhere, by the way, when I'm presenting this to the evolutionists. I keep making allowances to make it as fair as possible. He even goes on to say that this is twice as old as the alleged split between gorilla, chimpanzee, and man. So he's saying not only is the 10 million years 3 times older than Lucy, but it also happens to be twice as old as the supposed time between humans and gorillas and chimpanzees, where human beings supposedly split from gorillas and chimpanzees. This guy's being extra kind here. Okay, so then he goes on to say, well, in that much time, how many traits could be substituted at this crashing pace? 1 per generation, maximum approximately 500,000. So he's saying, if we're kind enough to give evolutionists more time than they ask for, in fact, 2 or 3 times more, and pretend we get more beneficial mutations for every single human generation, which we don't see in nature, we will even ignore the problem with the fitness cost, then we end up with just 500,000 beneficial DNA base pairs. Now, is that a problem? Well, yes, that's a big problem because that's 1/100% of the nucleotide sites in each human. The nucleotide is the base pair. Well, this is a disaster But why is this a disaster? Because it's only 0.0001 of the DNA, when the actual number we need is more than 30 million beneficial mutations, not even 500,000. You'll see in a minute why we need 30 million. We just don't get enough mutations, even after being extremely generous with the mutation rates, and even after giving the evolutionists 2 or 3 times more time, even after ignoring the fitness costs, even after giving them a generous 20 years per generation to give them more offsprings, mathematically, evolution collapses. There is no way to recover from this, but it gets worse. If we actually work with the real figures Haldane gave us, then we face a bigger problem, because Haldane said we only get one, that's right, one beneficial mutation every 300 generations. Not every generation, it's every 300 generations. So what happens if we calculate everything based on Haldane's figures, which is one mutation every 300 generations? Well, we only get, you're not going to believe this, 1,667 base pairs. That's way less than 500,000, and certainly nowhere near the 30 million we need. We only get 1,667. This is a catastrophe for evolutionists. That's why this became known as Haldane's dilemma. There is no way out. So this whole idea of evolution that teaches from goo to you by the way of the zoo became scientifically and mathematically bankrupt overnight. There is no kind way of saying this, but it's game over. It's farewell, it's adieu, it's adios, it's ciao, tschüss, ma saleme, any language you want, it's gone. Evolutionists have been keeping this very quiet for decades for a good reason. But it's time it came out, it's time it's got exposed. Okay, now I want to explain how you can share this information with others. But first, I need you to remember 4 facts. This will also act like a quick reminder or quick recap for you, and it will make things clearer. So follow me for all 4 facts. Fact number 1, you need to know the total number of DNA base pairs in a human. How many DNA base pairs do humans have? Not long ago, in 2012, they said there was 3.2 billion base pairs. They still say that now, by the way. But in 2019, the latest report says we have 4.5 billion base pairs. That's a lot more and makes Haldane's dilemma even worse. But we're Christians, so we'll be kind and just stick with 3 billion base pairs because we love them. By the way, even though you need to know these numbers, the evolutionist you're talking to doesn't. They just have to follow the numbers. Okay, so this is not going to be complicated. You just tell them the facts and they'll just follow it. Most people know this, by the way. Also, at the end, I'll show you how I'll have these numbers with me, or how I use them, so that I don't have to remember anything. So you don't have to remember any of this. So fact number 2, you need to know when this supposed ape-like creature evolved to humans. Now, there are many variations to this made-up story, depending on who you ask. Some say 3 million years, some say 5 million years. It depends on whether you're talking about Lucy or the dates of the alleged split between gorilla, chimpanzee, and man. This is the most generous report I can find, and I'm doing this because I want to be as kind as possible to the evolutionists. It says scientific evidence shows that the physical and behavioral traits shared by all people originated from ape-like ancestors and evolved over a period of approximately 6 million years. So there you have it. It's saying that it was about 6 million years ago. But we're not going to go with that. We're going to go with 10 million years. That will help the evolutionist. We will help them as much as we can. Trust you me, they'll need it. Fact number 3, you need to know what evolutionists say about the percentage difference between ape-like creatures and human DNA. So what is the DNA difference between ape-like creatures and humans? They first thought it was 1.2. But after they worked it out again, they said it was another 4 or 5% more. So that makes it somewhere between 5 and 6%, or 5 or 6%, or it's slightly over. But we're not going to use that, of course. We're going to be generous and go with 1%. It can't be fairer than that. And by the way, the latest report tells us that it's infinitely bigger difference than that. So, but next time I do this talk, I'll add those up-to-date figures and show you that it's even worse. But we're sticking with 1%. And finally, fact number 4, you need to know how long evolutionists say is a human generation. That's the total number of human years per generation. Depending on what you read, each report seems to have different ideas of what it should be. One says it's every 30 years is one generation. Another says every 25 years is a generation. And some even say every 20 years is one generation. That makes the average years per generation about 25 years, but we're going to ignore all that to be extra kind and go with the lowest figure of 20 years per generation. That works in my favor, and because it makes it easier to calculate things, but it's also in the favor of the evolutionists. We're trying to look after them as much as we can because we're Christians and we love them. There it is. So here are all the facts again, known as the summary of summaries. Fact number 1, the human DNA is larger than 4.5 billion base pairs, but we'll assume it's only 3 billion base pairs. We're working with a smaller number to help them. Fact number 2, according to evolutionists, human ancestors lived about 6 million years, even though a lot of evolutionists claim that it's a lot less than that. But we'll go with 10 million years because we're kind. Fact number 3, according to evolutionists, humans and ape-like creatures differ by 5 to 6%. We'll assume it's only 1%, even though actually it's even more than 5 or 6% now. That's because we love them and we want to be fair as much as we can. Fact number 4, even though the average human generation is 25 years per generation, we'll assume it's 20 years per generation. This gives the evolutionists more generations to work with. All right, so finally, going all the way back to where we started, despite overwhelming evidence that we don't get any beneficial mutations without fitness cost, and despite Haldane calculating that you get only one beneficial mutation every 300 generations, well, guess what? We're going to go all out on this one and give the evolutionist one fully bona fide beneficial mutation every single generation and pretend that the fitness cost does not exist. How does that sound? I think that's super kind. I really do. In my humble opinion, that's pretty kind. Now, seriously, we can't get fairer than that. This is giving the evolutionist the maximum benefit of doubt. We're going beyond the call of duty here. There is no reason to get a single complaint about our calculations. So theoretically, evolutionists should be very happy with us. And now we are ready to demonstrate how to use the silver bullet against evolution. All right, so I have made this PowerPoint and I'm happy to pass it on, which will help you to use this without having to remember anything. Here it is on the screen and you got them numbered 1 to 7. And it's also touch screen, by the way. It's on PowerPoint. You can do touch screen. So the first thing you ask is, how many base pairs does a human being have? Whether they know it or not, you tell them it's 3 billion base pairs. And then the question number 2 is, what's the difference in percentage between an ape-like creature and a human being? Now, they're going to start saying 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6%. And whatever they say, look, I'm going to be as generous as I can, and I'm going to go with 1%. So what's the difference? That's number 3. What's the difference between ape-like creature and a human being? How many base pairs difference is that? Well, if it's 1% and we got 3 billion, then we're talking about 30 million base pairs difference. So that's how many base pairs we need to go from an ape-like creature to make a human being. That's how many different base pairs they are. Then we go down to number 4. We ask this question: how many years are there from an ape-like creature to human? How many years ago was this? They're going to say 5, 6, or 7 million. And then you're going to say, well, I'm going to be as kind as possible and go for 10 million. Gives you all the years you need. And then number 5, you ask the question, how many years do we have per generation for a human being? They're going to guess 20, 30, whatever number of years. You tell them, look, I'm going to go with 20 years per generation. And finally, you're going to say, how many generations does it take to create one beneficial mutation? Now, most people don't know the answer to this, but you're going to say, look, I'm going to give you the benefit of doubt and give you one beneficial mutation per generation. I mean, you can't get better than that. Now, if you divide these figures one after another, you will get 500,000 beneficial mutations. Now, as I told you before, we're ignoring the fitness cost here. We're just pretending there are genuine mutations that are beneficial, genuine ones. So we get 500,000. Well, how many do we need? We need 30 million. So my next question to the guy will be, well, how are you going to get me 30 million? We've come nowhere near 500,000, despite all the allowances I made. So how are you going to get the rest? And that stumps them. But when you tell them what Haldane really did, he said, well, he thought that you get only one beneficial mutation every 300 generations. Then you need recalculate. You get 1,667 beneficial mutations as opposed to 30 million that we need. That simply blows their minds because they think, wow, there is no way. This is a valid mathematical way of calculating things. And mathematically, it doesn't add up. And you have to give it up because you just can't make it work. But of course, what would be interesting is to find out, well, how many years do you need to actually get 30 million base pairs? Well, how many years does a human being or an ape-like creature need to evolve over what period of time to actually get the 30 million beneficial mutations I'm after? Well, the answer, if you're interested, is 180 billion years. If we evolved for 180 billion years, then you will get 30 million base pair changes that you need to create a human being. And of course, that's way, way above what evolutionists believe the whole universe is, right? The whole universe is about 10 times less than that. So nothing rescues them from this problem, not even their own timescales. Evolution is literally dead. As I said, I'm happy to share this particular PowerPoint to do with how to work things out. Take it with you. When I'm doing it during open air, I actually print them out on a sheet of paper and start taking bits off to show people the numbers behind them. If you want, you can put this PowerPoint on your PC, your iPad, your tablet. As long as you got PowerPoint, it will work. Now, here's some of the examples where I use this during open air in different places in the UK. I don't know if you're familiar with the UK, but I've done it in a place called Lincoln, in a place called Leicester, and even in London Speaker's Corner. And for the ones that I did out there during open air, I did use the A3 printouts I just spoke about with little stickers that I take off to show them the number. Now, please, as I go through this, excuse the sound quality because some of them, the quality of the recording wasn't as good as we were hoping it to be. So it's only a few minutes long. Please enjoy it and use this as your example of how you can apply it. And after this, I'll give you a few more ideas and then it'll be over.
Are you open-minded?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Are you willing to change your worldview when you find scientifically something true?
Yes.
Okay, because you trust and believe in science and numbers, right?
Yep.
Evolutionists tell us that we came from ape-like creatures, agreed? Okay, good. To say. I understand. We share common ancestor with an ape-like creature? Okay, good. You said we came from animals. We're going to call that ape-like creatures, okay? DNA is what tells us what we're made of. We got 2 eyes, 2 hands, 10 fingers, toes, knees. Our system, immune system, vascular system, muscular system. We have systems, over a dozen of them or so, that we designed as a result of what DNA says. In fact, if you want to know, if you untangle one of those DNA from one cell, it will reach about 6 or 7 feet high. If you untangle it from your entire body, you can reach from here to the moon 552,000 times. Oh, what's the number of DNA base pairs inside a human being? Guess. 30,000? Okay. You're a little bit out. It's 3 billion. Okay. Base pairs. Okay, base pairs, you're happy with that? Base pairs? What's the difference in percentage between the DNA of an ape-like creature to a human being?
I don't think it's much.
You don't think it's much, right? Well, give us a percentage.
2%.
2%? 2%, okay. It's very small. I'm going to say the difference is 1%. It sounds fair to me, right? I'm going to give you less difference so that the likelihood of evolution can happen. So I'm going to give 1% difference. How many base pair changes will go from here to there? How many changes will have to occur if it's 1%? So it's 1% of 3 billion. What is that? 30 million. You're nearly there. Okay, here we go. 30 million changes is what I need from here to there. You know what they say? They tell you that you have to have mutations, changes in the DNA to change something from one species to another. How many years did it take? to go from here to there? 6 million. Okay, listen, 3 to 6 million, I agree with Paul. But I'm going to be nice to Paul because I like Paul and I like you all. I'm going to give you 10 million. That's good, right? Because I'm going to give you more time. All right, I'm being really good here. All right, so here we go. There is 3 million in reality, but I'm going to give you 10 million. Just to show you how absurd this theory is. How many years does it take before you reproduce and have another generation? 40? 40 years, it's good, it's good. You know what? You're not far off. I'm going to be very, very generous, Adam. I'm just going to do it to make a point here. I'm going to give you 20 years for every generation. That means you get a lot of generations for that many years, yeah? So I'm going to give you 20. You know, they tell you that DNA changes from one to another through mutations. How many beneficial mutations do we observe today?
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot? How about if I told you on camera none? That's a surprise, but I'm going to qualify that by saying without fitness costs. That means you can get a mutation that makes something work better, but in general it's worse than a normal human being who doesn't have the mutation. But I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to give you one beneficial mutation every single generation. Listen, that's really, really good. Because the actual figure from the evolutionist point of view is every 300 generations you get one. I checked it out. If you don't believe me, when you go home, check it out. If it takes 10 million years and one mutation every 20 years, then you will only get 500,000 mutations over a period of 10 million years. Now, if you're going to get 500,000 over 10 million years, then you are way off the 30 million mutations you need to create a human being. 10 million years, and you have one beneficial mutation every 20 years, you'll have 500,000. But how many do you need? 31. 30 million. Where, Adam? How are you going to move this person to that person when I need 30 million mutations, but I can only get, at best, following your own rules, believing in your own make-up stories? How are you going to change me from one of those to those with 500,000 when I need 30 million? Now listen, I promise you I made none of this up. I'm not that clever, okay? I don't go out there inventing new genetics. It's got a name. It's got the name called Haldane's dilemma. This was done by an evolutionist in 1957. And another guy picked up afterwards in 1993. His name is Walt Remind, and he ironed out all these misunderstandings, and it has not been refuted since 1993. See, if Neil was only thinking science, he would say to himself today, yes, I'm going to think about this, I'm going to take this home with me, and I'm happy to give you copies of this, and I'm going to check it out. Okay, now, Adam, you did promise me one thing.
I'll be open-minded.
You said you're going to be open-minded, and if you're a neutral person who's standing there, neutral, not biased in your beliefs, not biased, if you say to me right now you're going to stick to your belief despite these figures as an engineer, then you have to be honest with me and say, I am being biased in my views.
I am biased in my
Okay, that's it. If I could bring this to you right now and you were neutral, you didn't have your strong views, if you weren't religious about your views, it sounds to me you're as religious as I am. Do you agree? Okay, you're as religious as I am. If you didn't have your religious views, you would look at that and you would go and examine it, wouldn't you?
I want to do my research on it.
Agreed. That's all I'm asking for you. So I really appreciate your time. Yes, Paul, put it here. Everybody give him a big hand. For this one, to finish this off like this, we're here to give you good news. Paul, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. This is a gift from me to you. Give everybody a hand to Adam here. Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sure.
I'm going to give Adam some gifts, so give me just 1 minute. This is the ultimate backup. Doing everything I've got in it, okay? Scientific in every possible way. So please listen to that, and it'll be a pleasure to meet you again. Thank you. I'm John.
John, sorry.
It's a pleasure.
Great. Okay, now comes the $6 million question. How does the evolutionist respond when you explain all these facts? Well, the funny thing is, their first reaction is not to check the figures or examine the information. Their first reaction is to find any old reason to discredit it, even though they know nothing about genetics. But when they discredit the argument, they're doing what? They're going against their own theory, because this is not something I came up with. It's something they told us about. They're not arguing with me. They're not arguing with John Harris. They're arguing with John Haldane. They're disagreeing with his own researcher, with their own researcher, who was a world-renowned evolutionist in their own eyes. Now, if you do your own research on Haldane's dilemma, you'll find a Wikipedia that praises a Japanese biologist called Moto Kimura for solving this dilemma in 1968. But the funny thing is, Moto Kimura solved the dilemma by agreeing with John Haldane and introducing a completely different mechanism for evolution, which is not based on natural selection. That's right. Natural selection was out of the window. Well, if he solved the dilemma, then what does that mean? It means that John Haldane was right about it all along. It was a dilemma. So they can't deny it. At least they can't deny what Moto Kimura did to solve the problem. But it also means they have to admit that evolution through natural selection is really dead. Why else would Moto Kimura need to come up with a different theory that doesn't include natural selection? What most people don't know is that Kimura's solution introduces his own dilemma because his solution is riddled with problems that no one talks about, in the same way they don't talk about Haldane's dilemma. On top of that, the whole world still communicates this evolution theory and talks about natural selection as if it's still a credible theory that hasn't been discredited decades ago. For example, Richard Dawkins still talks about evolution through natural selection. You still find it in textbooks, secular science TV shows, secular museums. You still find this everywhere. It's embarrassing. Evolutionists want to tell us that evolution is all about science, but then go and ignore science to promote an anti-scientific theory. It's just a religious movement disguised as science. The sooner people realize this, the better. It has nothing to do with science. Anyway, here's the deal, which I want to talk about next time. What did Moto Kimura introduce, and does it really solve the dilemma? And what other complaints or claims do evolutionists make to dismiss Haldane's dilemma? Let me leave you with this thought to end with, which I'll expand on next time. If Moto Kimura was right about his theory, then it means John Haldane was right about evolution through natural selection being dead. Otherwise, what was the point of Moto Kimura's work? He supposedly came up to solve the dilemma. Therefore, Haldane's dilemma must be true. But if, on the other hand, Moto Kimura was wrong about his own theory to fix the dilemma, well, that means John Haldane was again right about the dilemma. In other words, Moto Kimura tried to solve the problem but couldn't. That means Haldane was right about the dilemma, and he's still right about the dilemma today. Remember, the evolutionists are proudly telling us that this one guy called Moto Kimura solved the problem. That's why it becomes a bigger problem for them. So if Moto Kimura was right, then the dilemma was right, and it's still right. Therefore, evolution through natural selection is dead. But if Moto Kimura was wrong, then the dilemma was right, and it's still right. Therefore, evolution through natural selection is dead. Either way, the theory of evolution through natural selection is dead and couldn't possibly be the explanation or the means or the mechanism for evolution. So in conclusion, evolution through natural selection is dead. I hope I made myself clear. But the icing on the cake is what Moto Kimura came up with to solve Haldane's dilemma. Once you understand that, you would know that evolution is really dead, because now we don't have any scientific explanation for this supposed evolution. Therefore, finally, thanks to John Haldane, I'd like to finish with these words, which I wish to coin. Evolution is dead. Evolution is really, really dead. Maybe that could be a title of a book I could eventually maybe write. All right, so thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed that. Hopefully that was informative. If you have any questions, then I'm here. And of course, most of the questions you're likely to bring up will be resolved next time. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and I am now back with you.
And we
Well,
see
right.
you.
Oh.
That was
And that-
great.
Yeah,
go
that
ahead,
was
Terry.
well, that was very interesting, and we're looking forward to the rest of it. I do have some questions here that I don't know. Maybe you answered them already because some of them were posted early in, but let's go through them. And even if you did, then you could review the answers. Or if any of the questions are things that you're going to talk about next week, you can say, stay tuned for next week. Okay.
Yes,
So,
please knock yourselves out. Ask me whatever you want.
okay, first question, can a C or G? So when you were showing the animation of the DNA and the codes, so Jimbo wants to know, can a C or G accidentally get put or mutated into a spot made for an A or T, for example? Meaning, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. A mutation means a corruption. So something has gone wrong, and therefore that wrong could be anything you want it to be, anything that it could possibly be. So it can do a substitution, it can change a letter, but remember they match each other, don't they? So whenever a letter changes on one side, the letter changes on the other side. Otherwise, it couldn't actually do the match chemically. But yes, of course, it can change whatever you can imagine it could change. 100%.
Interesting. And then Robin is asking about the stops malaria but causes sickle cell.
You
Yeah.
have
I
a
think-
slide up there. What stops malaria and what causes sickle cell?
Okay, so shall I bring up the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means I would have to share it again. So give me 10 seconds. The sharing is this one. All right. Can you see it on the screen?
Yes.
All right. So there's a mutation that takes place on the actual the base pair, which gets rid of malaria but introduces sickle cell. So clearly, it causes the blood cell to be messed up in such a way that it causes a great deal of pain. Although it doesn't kill you, you live in agony for the rest of your life, whereas
But you
malaria
don't-
would actually kill.
Yeah, okay, so you don't get malaria, but you get the sickle cell.
That's right, because you can no longer get malaria because of the shape of the blood cell, but now because of that, you suffer something else. So you get rid of one problem, which is death, which is not bad, but now you didn't really get rid of everything because now you introduced something else. So it came at a cost, and the cost was pretty high.
There's a drug now to treat sickle cell, and that's what caught my attention. But thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, obviously, we can intervene and then try to resolve problems or reduce our pain or do other things. But in nature, when you have a problem to do with a disease like that, naturally, you haven't actually benefited anything, because the whole idea is that you're benefiting something and you're becoming bigger, stronger, and better. Well, you didn't become bigger, stronger, and better. You became just ill. And if you continue down that road, you're not gonna have a whole bunch of people evolving into something better. They're going to evolve into something eventually worse. And from the evolutionist point of view, actually, people with malaria should die out so that they don't reproduce. The same with sickle cell disease.
Thank you.
That's kind of a dangerous path of thought that people whose mutations aren't helpful should just be eliminated.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking to evolutionists. Yeah.
Almost like we've kind of seen some of that played out in recent years. But anyway, I have a question. So Dr. John Sanford of Logos Research Associates, he's the one who coined the phrase genetic entropy, but he also developed a gene gun that it can. Are you familiar with this? That can insert.
Not a gene gun. No, that sounds interesting. Tell me about it.
Well, I was going to ask you about it. So maybe that's something you could look into before next week. But
gene gun, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it. But as were showing that slide just now and talking about it, it made me wonder if that's the purpose of it, is to change some of like if the letters get swapped, then to change them back. I don't know. But
yeah, it sounds interesting. But remember, if we need human intervention, if we're bringing a cure to the problem, then you're not really you're intervening with evolution rather than letting evolution take its course.
Right.
So any intelligent design or any intelligent interference is actually getting in the way. You need evolution to take its course. Remember, according to evolution, it's 2 or 3 million years ago. There were none of these things, and they're pretending that without any of these things being in place, that things were getting bigger, better, and cleverer. Well, if that's the case, then the best thing to do with people when they have a disease is to kill them off, don't interfere, and let them get on with their evolution. And some people would make the case saying, well, you're just interfering with evolution. I mean, Hitler wanted to advance evolution quickly, didn't he? He was helping the killing of people in order for evolution to take place, speed up evolution. So, I mean, if you really want to be an evolutionist and really believe that people are evolving and getting better, then the recommendation should be get rid of all the hospitals. Why do we have hospitals? Why do we keep old people alive? Because they're just taking up resources. You should keep those resources for the younger generation, the stronger and better.
Money. That's why.
Money.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, before we digress any further, let's go ahead and wrap things up for this week, knowing that you'll come back next week. And so if we have more questions, we can ask them. So before we sign off, John, remind everybody how they can find you and your ministry and follow you.
Yes, we're on everywhere. We're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, obviously on the internet. So whenever you want to find us, the easiest way to do this is to type Living Waters Europe. Don't type Living Waters. Well, I mean, you can type Living Waters. You'll end up in America. But if you type Living Waters, you get our channel and our website. So literally, the magic word is Europe. Put that in there after Living Waters, and you'll find us so easily. Obviously, that's probably the easiest way to tell everybody how to find us. That would be the most helpful way.
Perfect. And then we, again, are Creation Fellowship Santee, and you can find a list of our upcoming speakers by typing in tinyurl.com/CF Santee, C like creation, F like fellowship, Santee is spelled Santee. And you can also email us there. Our email address is there. It's creationfellowshipsantee@gmail.com, so that you get on our list so that you don't miss any of our upcoming speakers as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off the live stream and recording for tonight.